My name is Caroline, and I'm 54 years old. I'm a retired nurse, and my life has always revolved around one person, my daughter, Alyssa. She's 27 now, married to a man named Eric. I never really trusted him, though Alyssa swore he was everything she'd ever wanted. I wanted to believe her, but something about him always made me uneasy. The morning began like any other. I was making coffee when I heard the faint vibration of my phone on the counter. A new message. I wiped my hands on a towel, took a sip of coffee, and unlocked the screen. There it was, a voice message from Alyssa, sent at 12:47 a.m. The timestamp made my stomach tighten. She never called that late, let alone sent voice messages. At first, I thought it might be an accidental recording. Maybe she and Eric were out late, laughing or talking. But as soon as I pressed play, I knew something was wrong. Her voice trembled through the speaker. "Mom, you're not coming with us." Then silence. No explanation, no follow-up, just those 6 words. I froze, the mug slipping from my hand and shattering against the tile. My heart began to race. What did she mean? Not coming where? Why did her voice sound like that, nervous, maybe scared? I tried to call her immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again, each attempt met with the same cold tone. "The number you've dialed is not available." I told myself not to panic, but every second stretched into eternity. My daughter and I spoke almost daily. She always texted if she'd be unavailable. The last time I'd seen her was 2 days earlier, when she'd stopped by to drop off some documents for her new job. She seemed distracted, her eyes darting toward the door every few minutes as if she was afraid someone might walk in. I replayed the message several times, focusing on her tone, trying to decipher the emotion behind her words. There was a pause before she said it, like she was forcing herself to speak. The way her voice cracked on "Mom" made my throat tighten. I wanted to believe it was nothing, but deep down, I knew better. A mother always knows when something's wrong. I'd felt it for months, ever since she married Eric. He was charming, handsome, and successful. At least on the surface. But beneath that smile was a man who always needed control. I'd noticed how Alyssa's independence had slowly faded after their wedding, how she asked his permission before making the smallest decisions. I thought back to the last family dinner we had. Eric kept interrupting her, finishing her sentences, laughing at things she said as if she were a child. Alyssa had laughed along nervously, but I saw her hand trembling beneath the table. I wanted to speak up, to tell him to stop. But Alyssa gave me a pleading look, a silent "please don't." Now that voice message echoed in my mind. "You're not coming with us." Us, meaning her and Eric. Were they going somewhere? Moving? Running away? I didn't remember her mentioning any trip. If she were leaving, why would she exclude me like that? We were all the family each other had. I went to her social media accounts, scrolling for any clue. Her last post was 3 days old, a photo of a sunset with the caption, "New beginnings." I didn't like the sound of that anymore. The comments beneath were filled with hearts and compliments, but none from Eric. In fact, I realized he hadn't appeared in her posts for weeks. As hours passed with no response, I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. I called her best friend, Janelle, who said Alyssa had canceled their lunch plans yesterday without explanation. She'd sounded off, according to Janelle, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. I turned to Eric's number next, straight to voicemail. His outgoing message was cheerful, but in that moment, it felt mocking. "Hey, it's Eric. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you soon." I left one, then another, and another, each more desperate than the last. By noon, panic had settled into my chest like a weight. I checked local hospitals, called the police station, even drove past their home, but the blinds were drawn and the driveway was empty. I rang the doorbell again and again, but no one answered. Standing there, I could almost feel her presence, like she'd been there recently. There was a half-burned candle still flickering in the window, and that small detail told me something. She hadn't planned to disappear completely, not voluntarily. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The voice message replayed in my mind like a haunting melody. What was she trying to tell me? Was she warning me? Protecting me? Or was she saying goodbye? I wanted to believe that she'd sent it under pressure, that someone had made her say those words, because the idea of Alyssa willingly cutting me out of her life didn't make sense. Not after everything we'd been through together. I tried to calm myself down, to think logically. Maybe they were moving and she didn't want me to worry about the distance. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But no matter how I rationalized it, the fear refused to fade. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I couldn't help but notice how empty the house felt. Every photo of Alyssa on the walls seemed to stare back at me, pleading for help. The sound of the refrigerator humming was the only noise in the room. I picked up my phone once more, listening to the message again, praying I'd hear something new this time, some clue I'd missed before. But it was the same 6 words, over and over, wrapping around my heart like chains. I had no idea that within hours, I'd uncover Eric's plan, and that it was already collapsing. Before that haunting message, I had already sensed tension brewing between Alyssa and Eric. It wasn't something obvious at first, no. Shouting matches, no slammed doors. It was in the silence, the kind that fills a room and presses against your chest until breathing feels unnatural. The last few months had been a slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew about their marriage. Alyssa used to visit me every weekend. We'd bake together, gossip about our neighbors, and talk about her dreams of opening her own boutique someday. But lately, her visits had become shorter and less frequent. She'd text, saying, "Mom, I'll stop by later." And then hours would pass without a word. When she did show up, she'd smile like everything was fine, but her eyes told another story. Eric rarely came with her anymore. At first, he'd join us for dinner, flashing that polished grin and complimenting my cooking. But as time went on, he found excuses to avoid coming: work emergencies, late meetings, or business trips. Alyssa always covered for him, her explanations rehearsed, like lines she'd been forced to memorize. One Sunday afternoon, I noticed she kept glancing at her phone. Every few minutes, she'd pick it up, type something, and then quickly set it face down on the table. When I asked who she was texting, she said, "Just Eric. He worries when I'm gone too long." She laughed nervously, but it didn't sound real. My gut twisted. Why would a husband worry about his wife spending time with her mother? I started paying closer attention. Her clothes looked looser, her nails unkempt, her once vibrant smile faded. She was exhausted, and not just from work. It was a kind of weariness that went deeper, a fear she couldn't admit. A week before the voice message, I overheard something that still chills me. Alyssa had come over to drop off some documents for her car insurance renewal. While she was in the kitchen, her phone rang, and the caller ID flashed, "Eric." She answered, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Please don't make me choose." That sentence sliced through me like glass. I froze in the hallway, heart pounding. Choose what? Between who? When she came back, her smile was plastered on again, but her eyes were glassy. I didn't say a word. I just hugged her longer than usual before she left. That was the last time she seemed remotely at peace. It wasn't always like this. When Alyssa first met Eric, I'd been cautiously happy for her. She'd been working at a marketing firm, juggling long hours and loneliness. Eric swept in like a movie character, expensive suits, confident voice, promises of the world. He brought her flowers, opened doors, treated her like she was the center of his universe. He even called me Mom once after their engagement. It was too perfect. I should have known then that perfection is usually the prettiest disguise for something rotten. After they married, things changed almost overnight. Eric handled their finances, saying it was easier that way. He convinced Alyssa to quit her job, claiming he wanted her to relax and focus on their home. At first, she said she liked it until her world began to shrink. Friends drifted away. She stopped going to yoga, stopped calling coworkers. I'd suggest she visit me more often, but she'd hesitate before answering, like she was waiting for permission from someone who wasn't in the room. When I confronted her about it, she'd always say, "You don't understand, Mom. Eric's just protective." But there's a difference between protection and possession. Eric didn't protect her, he caged her. I remember one afternoon vividly. Alyssa had come to my house with a small bruise on her wrist. She brushed it off, saying she'd bumped into a cabinet. But as a nurse, I knew that wasn't the shape of a cabinet edge, it was the shape of fingers. I wanted to push her to tell me the truth, but the fear in her eyes told me she wasn't ready. That night, after she left, I sat in my recliner and stared at the dark window, replaying every conversation we'd had in the past few months. Every "I'm fine," every "it's just stress," every "don't worry about us." Each one was a brick in a wall Eric had built around her. 2 days later, Alyssa called to say Eric had planned a spontaneous getaway for them. Her tone was hesitant, almost forced. I tried to sound excited for her, but my stomach turned. Something about it felt final, like she was preparing me for something neither of us wanted to say out loud. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining her packing a suitcase while Eric watched her every move. I wondered if she looked at her phone, wanting to call me but too afraid to. I told myself I was overreacting, but a mother's intuition doesn't lie. The next morning, I texted her, "Call me when you can. Love you." No reply. Later that evening, I tried again. Still nothing. Then came the silence. The kind that hums in your bones, warning you that something's about to break. When I finally got that voice message hours later, everything made sense. The tension, the secrecy, the fear, it all pointed to one truth. Alyssa was in trouble, and Eric was at the center of it. I didn't have evidence, not yet. But I didn't need it. Every instinct in me screamed that she hadn't chosen to send that message. She'd been made to. Looking back, that was when Eric's plan to control everything truly began. The mask Eric wore in public finally slipped one afternoon at their home. It was a chilly Wednesday in early spring, and Alyssa had called the night before, her voice faint and distant. She said she wasn't feeling well, just tired, she claimed, but I could hear the strain in every word. I decided to bring her some homemade soup the next day, hoping a surprise visit might lift her spirits. I didn't tell her I was coming. Maybe part of me wanted to see for myself what was really going on. The drive to their suburban house felt heavier than usual. Every mile, closer, the knot in my stomach tightened. When I pulled into their driveway, I noticed something immediately. The curtains were drawn even though the afternoon sun was shining bright. Alyssa had always loved natural light. She used to tell me that sunlight made her feel alive, but now, her home looked dark and closed off, like it was hiding something. I grabbed the container of soup and knocked on the front door. After a long pause, Eric answered. He was dressed casually, but his expression wasn't friendly. His usual smooth smile was gone, replaced by a guarded look that made my skin prickle. "Caroline," he said flatly, leaning against the doorframe. "Did we have plans today?" I forced a smile. "No, I just thought I'd bring Alyssa some soup. She said she wasn't feeling well." He didn't open the door wider. Instead, he folded his arms. "She's resting. You should have called first." Something in his tone was off, too sharp, too dismissive. "I won't wake her," I said gently. "Just want to check on her for a moment." He hesitated, his eyes darting upstairs, then back to me. "She's fine, Caroline, really. She needs rest, not interruptions." I could hear faint movement inside, footsteps maybe. I took a small step forward. "Eric, please. I'll be quick." His jaw tightened. I said she's resting. His voice rose slightly, the politeness evaporating. "You need to respect our space." And then, from upstairs, I heard it, a soft, trembling voice. "Mom, it's okay." Alyssa called out. Her voice stopped me cold. It didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded like surrender. I tried to move past Eric, but he blocked me with his arm. "She's fine," he repeated. Louder this time. "You're overreacting." "Then let me see her," I snapped, my patience gone. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "I don't appreciate being disrespected in my own house." For a moment, we stood there, staring at each other. His charm was gone completely. And what stared back at me wasn't a protective husband, it was something colder. Something dangerous. "I'm her mother," I said, my voice shaking. I have every right to see her. His lips curved into a tight, humorless smile. Not if she doesn't want you to. The way he said it, possessive, deliberate, made my heart stop. Not if she doesn't want you to? Or not if you decide she doesn't want me to? Alyssa's footsteps came closer, but Eric turned and barked. Go back upstairs. The sharpness in his voice made me flinch. For a second, I caught a glimpse of her at the top of the staircase. She was pale, her hair messy, wearing a long sweatshirt that didn't quite hide the red mark near her collarbone. Our eyes met, and I saw fear flicker in hers before Eric stepped into my line of sight, blocking her completely. Caroline, I think it's time you go, he said coldly. You're upsetting her. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. Upsetting her? She looks terrified. He stepped forward until we were almost face to face. You have no idea what's going on here. Don't make assumptions. You've always been dramatic. That word dramatic was the same one he'd used years ago when I questioned how fast they were getting married. It wasn't just dismissive, it was meant to belittle me. I clenched my fists. If you hurt her, he cut me off with a laugh that didn't sound human. Hurt her? Caroline, you really need to get control of your imagination. I could see his hand twitch at his side, like he was restraining himself. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my heart screamed to stay. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of scaring me away. Instead, I took a deep breath, stepped back, and forced a calm smile. Tell Alyssa I love her, I said softly, and tell her I'll be calling later. His expression faltered for just a split second. I turned and walked to my car, trying not to show the tremor in my hands. As I reached for my keys, I looked back at the house. Through a gap in the curtain, I saw Alyssa watching me, her hand pressed against the window. It broke me. She looked trapped. I drove away slowly, tears blurring the road. Every instinct I had was screaming that something terrible was happening behind those walls. I wanted to go straight to the police, but what would I say? That my grown daughter's husband didn't let me inside their house? That I felt something was wrong? It wasn't enough, not legally. I spent that night pacing the living room, replaying every second of that encounter. His tone, his eyes, the bruise, her silence, it all painted a picture I didn't want to face. Eric wasn't just controlling. He was dangerous. When I finally went to bed, I kept my phone on my chest, praying that Alyssa would call. That she'd whisper, "Mom, you were right." But the call never came. And deep down, I knew the silence wasn't a coincidence, it was enforced. I left that house shaken, not realizing Eric was already preparing to take Alyssa away from me. When Alyssa stopped answering calls for 2 full days, I went straight to the police. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, just paced the house, replaying every warning sign I'd ignored. The memory of her pale face behind that window burned in my mind. Something inside me screamed that time was running out. So I gathered every message, every photo, every scrap of evidence I could think of, and drove to the police station. The officer at the front desk listened politely, but as soon as I told him Alyssa was 27, his expression shifted from concern to apathy. "Ma'am," he said, tapping on his keyboard, "your daughter's an adult. She's allowed to go off the grid if she wants." I clenched my hands together. "You don't understand, this isn't like her. She always calls. Always. She left me a strange voice message. I think she's in trouble." He sighed. "We can file a wellness check, but it could take a few days. If she's with her husband, we can't force contact unless there's evidence of a crime." Evidence. The word echoed in my head. How was I supposed to have evidence when the only proof I had was a mother's intuition? I filled out the paperwork, but the moment I left, I knew they wouldn't help me. They didn't see the tremor in her voice, the fear in her eyes. To them, she was just another adult who didn't want to talk to her mom. Back home, I tried every number I could think of. Alyssa's phone voicemail. Eric's disconnected. Her best friend Janelle's no answer. I even called her workplace, only to learn that Alyssa had resigned 2 weeks ago. No notice, no explanation. My heart dropped. Eric had cut off her job, the last piece of independence she had left. I decided to drive to their house again. Maybe she'd returned. Maybe there'd be a sign. But when I pulled up, the street was eerily still. Their car wasn't in the driveway, and the mailbox was overflowing. Newspapers lay scattered near the porch. I knocked, then pounded. Nothing. Something told me to check the side gate. It was unlocked, so I stepped into the backyard. The grass was overgrown, the patio chairs stacked haphazardly. And then I saw an empty flower pot on the ground with Alyssa's gardening gloves beside it. She loved those gloves. I'd given them to her last Mother's Day. They were faded purple with her initials stitched on the cuffs. I knelt down, tracing the initials with my fingers, feeling my chest tighten. This wasn't just neglect, it was abandonment. I snapped photos of everything, the gloves, the mail, the unkempt yard, and brought them back to the police. But the officer barely looked up. "We'll log it, ma'am," he said. His voice detached. "If she doesn't reach out in a week, you can follow up." A week. They wanted me to wait a week. My daughter could be dead by then. I left before my anger turned into tears in front of them. I sat in my car in the station parking lot, shaking. How could no one see what I saw? Why was everyone so ready to dismiss a mother's fear? That night I called hospitals, every single one within a 100-mile radius. No, Alyssa. I even checked shelters, wondering if maybe she'd run. But deep down, I knew Alyssa wouldn't leave without telling me. She wasn't the kind of person to disappear. As the hours stretched into another sleepless night, I listened to her voice message again. "Mom, you're not coming with us." That one line circled in my brain like a curse. Us. Who was us? Her and Eric. Obviously, but where were they going? And why would she need to exclude me? I plugged my phone into my laptop and slowed the audio down, playing it at half speed. That's when I heard it, a faint sound in the background, something like a car engine. Then, a man's muffled voice. I couldn't make out the words, but it was deep and sharp. My blood ran cold. Eric was there when she recorded it. I wrote everything down, every detail. The time the message was sent, the background noise, the inflection in her tone. I didn't care if the police thought I was paranoid. I'd been a nurse for 20 years, I knew how to read signs of distress, and that voice wasn't calm. It was desperate. The next morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If no one would look for Alyssa, I would. I started with what I knew. Eric had mentioned once that his company was expanding operations in Arizona. He'd bragged about networking with new investors there. It was a faint lead, but it was something. I called the HR department of the firm he used to work for, pretending to be a potential employer, verifying his past employment. The woman on the line told me he'd quit suddenly 2 weeks ago. No notice, no forwarding address. My heart sank. That timing matched it perfectly with Alyssa's resignation. I went online, scouring through their social media again. Eric's accounts were deleted. Alyssa's was still there but inactive. The last thing she'd liked was a post about starting over. The irony made me sick. I knew I couldn't sit around waiting anymore. I printed a missing person flyer myself, using Alyssa's graduation photo. I put it up around town coffee shops, grocery stores, bus stops. People stared at me with pity, some with suspicion. No one knew that behind my calm face, I was falling apart. The hardest part was coming home to silence. The house felt colder than ever. Every sound made me jump. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart raced, only to crash when it was another spam call. I kept her room just as she'd left it. The spare bed was neatly made, a few of her childhood books still on the shelf. I sat there sometimes, holding her old stuffed bear, whispering, "I'm not giving up on you." But as the days passed, and leads went nowhere, the fear turned into something darker, a gnawing dread that maybe I was too late. Then, as I sat staring at the voice message one more time, something hit me. Maybe the words weren't just goodbye. Maybe they were a clue. "You're not coming with us." It sounded like something someone else wanted her to say, as if she didn't have a choice. And that thought lit a fire in me. If Eric had forced her to send that message, he'd made a mistake. He'd left a trail. That phrase became my obsession and my only clue. Desperation pushed me to look where no one else had her online accounts. I'd already exhausted every traditional path. The police, hospitals, and even missing persons forums. No one could help me. So I decided to search where Eric might not have thought I'd look. Alyssa's digital world. It started with a memory. Months ago, when Alyssa's phone had been acting up, I'd helped her back up her photos to our shared family cloud drive. Maybe, just maybe, she'd continued using it. My fingers trembled as I logged in. The familiar password, her childhood dog's name, worked. The folder loaded slowly, each thumbnail a lifeline. At first, it was all old pictures. Birthdays, vacations, and candid moments of her smiling next to me in the kitchen. Then, I saw a new upload date just 3 days earlier. My breath caught. I opened it. There were photos I'd never seen before. A cluttered motel room, an open suitcase filled with clothes, and a blurry shot of a highway sign, Interstate 17, Phoenix North. My heart began to pound. I clicked through each image carefully, analyzing the smallest details. In one, the reflection in the mirror showed Alyssa holding her phone up for a selfie. Her eyes were swollen, her hair messy. But what froze me was the faint bruise around her wrist. It wasn't from a cabinet this time. It was from fingers. Then, in another photo, I noticed something small but crucial, a paper receipt tucked beside a water bottle on the nightstand. I zoomed in. It was from a gas station, time-stamped 11:12 p.m., the night before the voice message was sent. The location read, Wickenburg, Arizona. I felt my pulse quicken. They were on the road. And they weren't hiding well. I pulled out my notebook and wrote everything down. Dates, times, locations. Then I did something the police should have done from the start. I called that gas station. The man who answered confirmed that a couple matching their description had stopped there. He remembered because the woman looked upset and kept glancing toward the car while the man paid for gas. I asked if they mentioned where they were headed. The clerk hesitated, then said, I think I heard him say something about Flagstaff. But I'm not sure. Flagstaff. My mind started connecting dots. Eric's supposed business expansion was in Arizona, and now they were heading that direction. It couldn't be a coincidence. I immediately called the police again, giving them all the new information, the photos, the timestamps, the location. The dispatcher's response nearly made me scream. Ma'am, we appreciate your diligence, but without proof of a crime, there's not much we can do. It sounds like they're just traveling. Traveling. As if a woman leaving bruises behind and abandoning her home without a word was just traveling. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. If they wouldn't take this seriously, I'd handle it myself. That evening, I printed out every photo and pinned them to a corkboard I kept in my study. I drew lines between each clue, tracing their path like a detective from one of those crime shows I used to watch. But this wasn't fiction. This was my daughter. The next step was to find a pattern. I logged into her email, thankfully. She'd once given me her password for emergencies. Most messages were routine, but one stood out. A confirmation from a booking site for a Desert Sun motel in Kingman, Arizona. The reservation was made under the name Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. My heart skipped. Eric's last name wasn't Hayes. But months earlier, I'd found an old envelope at their house, addressed to an Eric Hayes. At the time, I thought it was a mix-up. Now I realized it was one of his aliases. I called the motel, pretending to be Alyssa's mother, checking to confirm a reservation. The clerk said they'd checked out the morning before. They left in kind of a hurry, she added. Didn't even wait for breakfast. I swallowed hard. Did the woman seem okay? She was quiet. The man did all the talking. That was enough for me. I didn't tell her more, just thanked her and hung up. I spent that night driving. I couldn't sit still anymore. I filled my car with gas, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and got on the road toward Arizona. I didn't have a plan, just determination. Every mile felt like a step closer to Alyssa. As I drove through the dark desert highways, I played her voice message again. Each time it hurt less like a wound and more like a puzzle I needed to solve. I began to realize something. She'd sent it at exactly 12:47 a.m. The same time the motel receipt was time-stamped. Maybe she'd recorded it there. Maybe she was trying to send me a signal that she couldn't say out loud. I looked out at the horizon. the distant glow of desert lights flickering in the night. Somewhere out there, my daughter was trapped in a nightmare, and I wasn't going to let her face it alone. I promised myself that before the sun rose again, I'd find anyone who could help me track them down. I'd call every motel, every rental agency, every small-town sheriff in Arizona if I had to. The mother in me wouldn't rest. The nurse in me wouldn't quit. I grabbed my car keys and decided to follow the trail myself. Halfway through my drive to Arizona, I stopped for gas and coffee, and met a woman who changed everything. The road had been long, dry, and endless, the desert sun glaring down like an unblinking eye. I'd been driving for nearly 10 hours with only short breaks, my mind running through every possible scenario of what Eric could be planning. Each mile felt heavier, like I was driving into the unknown with only instinct as my compass. By the time I pulled into a small roadside diner outside Prescott, I was running on caffeine and sheer determination. The place looked like it hadn't changed since the 1,970 seconds faded red booths, a jukebox that didn't work, and the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. I sat at the counter and ordered a refill, trying to gather my thoughts. That's when I met her, Sandra. She was in her 40s, with tired eyes but a kind face. She wore a motel clerk's uniform with a name tag that said Sandra L. I noticed her glancing at the notebook I'd been scribbling in, filled with notes about Alyssa, Eric, and the places I traced them to. "Doing some detective work?" she asked with a small smile. I hesitated before answering. "Looking for my daughter. She's missing." Something flickered in her eyes. "I see a lot of people come through town," she said carefully. "What's she look like?" I took out my phone and showed her a picture of Alyssa, the one from her graduation. Her smile was bright in that photo, full of life and hope. Sandra's expression changed immediately. Her hand went still around her coffee cup. "She was here," she said quietly. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "What?" Sandra leaned closer, lowering her voice. 2 nights ago. She came to the motel I work at the Desert Sun on Route 93. I remember because she looked scared. Said she needed to use the phone. But before I could help her, a man came in yelling. Big guy. Dark hair. Sharp eyes. He called her babe and said she was overreacting. She froze, like she didn't dare move. My throat went dry. "That was Eric," I whispered. Sandra nodded. "He told me to mind my business. They left right after that. I called the sheriff, but by the time anyone showed up, they were gone." I could barely breathe. The confirmation that Alyssa had been so close hours away from me made my heart ache and race at the same time. "Do you remember what car they were driving?" Sandra nodded slowly. "A dark gray SUV, Arizona plates, starting with the letters NVT. I wrote everything down, my hand trembling. "Do you know where they were headed?" She frowned, thinking hard. "He mentioned something about a cabin. I think he said it was near Flagstaff, something about needing space. A cabin. That sounded like isolation, exactly what Eric would want." My pulse quickened. I thanked Sandra repeatedly, tears pricking my eyes. She reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. "Don't give up," she said softly. She looked like she was trying to get away. I could see it in her eyes. I couldn't stop shaking as I got back into my car. The moment I started driving again, I called the local sheriff's department in Prescott and gave them every detail. I had Eric's name, the alias Hayes, the SUV, the motel incident. The dispatcher promised to look into it, but I'd already learned what that meant. Waiting for others to save Alyssa wasn't an option anymore. Hours passed as I drove north, deeper into Arizona. The scenery changed from dusty plains to winding mountain roads lined with pine trees. My GPS signal flickered in and out, and eventually, I lost cell service altogether. The silence of the wilderness pressed against the car windows. As the sky darkened, I began to see fewer signs of civilization. No gas stations, no lights, just the long stretch of road and my reflection in the windshield. I replayed Sandra's words in my head. She looked like she was trying to get away. That thought kept me going. It meant Alyssa hadn't given up. At a small rest stop near the edge of Coconino National Forest, I pulled over to check the map. A truck driver nearby noticed my exhaustion and offered me a cup of coffee from his thermos. I must have looked desperate, because he asked if I was okay. "My daughter's missing," I said quietly. He studied me for a long moment. "You're heading into the woods, aren't you?" I nodded. "Be careful," he said. "That area's got old cabins people rent out short-term. No phone lines, no neighbors. If someone wanted to hide..." He trailed off, shaking his head. I didn't need him to finish. That was exactly why Eric had taken her there. By the time I reached the forest road, night had fallen completely. My headlights carved narrow paths through the trees, revealing glimpses of fog and gravel. Then, just ahead, I saw faint tire marks veering off onto a dirt path. My heart jumped. I stopped the car and got out, shining my flashlight over the tracks. They were fresh, still crisp in the mud. My breath hitched as I noticed something else glinting near the edge of the path. I crouched and picked it up. It was a broken phone charm, Alyssa's. A tiny silver heart I'd given her years ago. I held it in my palm, the metal cold against my skin. It was proof. Proof she'd been here. Proof I wasn't imagining any of this. I climbed back into the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I followed the tracks deeper into the woods, each turn winding tighter, each shadow stretching longer. My headlights finally caught the shape of a small cabin in the distance, smoke faintly curling from its chimney. My pulse roared in my ears. I'd found them, or at least where they'd been. But I couldn't just rush in. Not alone. I parked a short distance away, heart hammering, and took photos of the cabin. The SUV parked nearby, and the license plate. The letters matched Sandra's description, NVT. My hands shook as I turned the car around, driving back toward the nearest stretch of road with signal. The plan was clear now. Get help, get Alyssa out. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror, my headlights caught something that made my stomach drop, a shadow in the distance, standing still in the road, watching my car disappear. That was the moment I decided to take matters into my own hands. Sandra's tip led me into the mountains outside Flagstaff. The closer I got, the thicker the woods became, and the air grew colder with every turn. The paved road gave way to dirt and gravel, and my car's tires crunched softly under the weight of uncertainty. I was driving deeper into nowhere, guided only by instinct, desperation, and the faint trail of tire marks that seemed to whisper, "You're getting closer." I'd left before sunrise, wanting to reach the area before anyone had time to move on. My phone had almost no signal, and the navigation app kept freezing, but I didn't dare turn back. Each bump in the road made my heart race. Each shadow that flickered across the windshield felt like it might be Eric watching me. When the path split, I stopped, unsure which direction to take. I opened the photos I'd taken the night before, the ones of the SUV and the trees around the cabin. I compared the background of one image to the scenery around me, searching for any familiar shapes. Then I saw it, a twisted pine tree, leaning toward the road like it was pointing the way. I turned right. After another mile, the forest began to thin, and then I saw it, the cabin. A small wooden structure, weathered and secluded, surrounded by towering trees. Smoke still curled lazily from the chimney. It looked like something out of a postcard, except the silence made it sinister. I parked a few hundred feet away and turned off the engine. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely unbuckle my seatbelt. Every instinct screamed to go inside and get Alyssa, but another voice, calmer, rational, the nurse in me, told me to stop. If Eric was there, rushing in could get both of us hurt. I needed proof, leverage, and help. I stepped quietly out of the car, the cold mountain air biting my skin. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of my boots on the dirt, the rustle of leaves, the faint chirp of distant crickets. I crept closer, keeping low, until I reached a cluster of bushes near the porch. From there, I could see inside through a small gap in the curtains. Eric was pacing across the living room, phone pressed to his ear, his movements sharp and agitated. His voice was muffled, but I caught fragments. "No, we can't stay much longer. She's getting difficult. I'll handle it." My stomach twisted. Then my eyes moved to the corner of the room, and there she was, Alyssa. She was sitting on a worn-out couch, knees drawn to her chest, her hair unkempt, and her face pale. She looked so small, so fragile. Her hands were clasped together, but I could see she was holding something, a phone, or maybe a photograph. I couldn't tell. The sight of her broke me and filled me with fire all at once. I wanted to burst through that door, but fear anchored me in place. I had to think. I needed law enforcement to see this for themselves. I crouched lower and took out my phone, zooming in through the glass. I snapped photo after photo: Alyssa, Eric, the cabin, even the SUV parked nearby. Proof that she was here. Proof she wasn't safe. When Eric moved toward the window, I ducked behind the bushes, heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. I stayed frozen until I heard him walk away. Then, I backed up slowly, moving toward my car without making a sound. My plan was to drive until I found signal again, call the sheriff, and lead them straight here. But just as I started the engine, my phone buzzed with a weak flicker of reception. A single text appeared from an unknown number. It said, "He knows." My blood ran cold. Who sent it? Alyssa? Someone else? I didn't know, but it jolted me into action. I floored the gas pedal and sped down the dirt road until I hit pavement again. After about 15 minutes, I finally got enough signal to call the sheriff's department. I told them everything: the location, the car, the photos, the danger. The dispatcher said she was sending a deputy immediately and told me to stay put until he arrived. I parked by a small ranger station near the base of the mountain, gripping my phone like a lifeline. When the deputy arrived, a young man named Reynolds first showed him the photos and explained everything. He seemed skeptical at first, but when he saw Alyssa's face in the pictures, his tone changed. "All right, ma'am," he said. "We'll check it out. Stay in your car and wait here." I wanted to protest, but I knew better than to interfere with their process. I watched as his cruiser disappeared up the dirt road toward the cabin. My fingers tapped anxiously against the steering wheel, every minute stretching like an hour. After what felt like forever, his voice crackled over the radio. "Dispatch, the cabin's empty. Looks like they cleared out." I froze. Empty? That couldn't be. They'd been there not even an hour ago. He came back down shortly after, dust trailing behind his car. I ran up to him. "Empty?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Car's gone too. Windows smashed. Looks like someone left in a hurry." I stared past him, up toward the ridge where I'd just seen my daughter alive. "She was there," I said, showing him the time-stamped photos again. "She was right there." The deputy sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "I believe you. But they're gone now. We'll issue a bolo on the vehicle, but without clear evidence of a crime, we can't file it as an abduction." Evidence. That word, again. It followed me like a curse. As I stood there, feeling helpless, a thought hit me: what if the text I'd received was from Alyssa? If she'd somehow managed to warn me? My hands trembled as I opened the message again. Just those two words. "He knows. He knows I was there." My heart dropped into my stomach as the realization sank in. Eric must have seen my car, or sensed someone watching. Maybe he'd seen me through the window. Maybe Alyssa had sent the warning before he could stop her. I turned to look back at the mountain, the trees now shrouded in evening fog. Somewhere up there, my daughter was still running from a man who'd rather destroy her than lose control of her. And now, he knew I was after him too. What I didn't know was that Eric had already realized I was following them. When I returned to the cabin with the sheriff's deputy, everything looked deserted. The scene was stripped bare, almost too clean, as if someone had erased every trace of life from the place. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and damp earth. The curtains were torn, one chair was overturned, and the silence felt like a scream frozen in time. Deputy Reynolds kept his hand on his holster as we walked through the cabin, his flashlight slicing through the shadows. The floorboards creaked under our feet. "Looks like they cleared out fast," he muttered. I swallowed hard. "She was here. I saw her. Just hours ago." He nodded. "I believe you, ma'am. But there's no sign of struggle. No blood, no footprints, no..." Then his flashlight beam landed on something small under the couch, a silver hairpin. I knew it instantly. It was one of Alyssa's. She'd worn it since high school, a tiny piece of jewelry shaped like a leaf. I picked it up with trembling hands. "She dropped this," I whispered. Reynolds looked uneasy. "All right, we'll bag it for evidence." But his tone suggested he didn't expect it to lead anywhere. Outside, I noticed the SUV's tire marks leading down the slope. They hadn't vanished, they'd fled. I pointed them out, and Reynolds sighed. "We'll put out an alert for the vehicle again." But I wasn't satisfied. My gut told me Alyssa hadn't left willingly. She was still nearby or in danger. The deputy insisted I return to town, saying it wasn't safe to stay out there alone. Reluctantly, I agreed, but every turn of my car wheels felt like a betrayal. I couldn't shake the feeling that Eric was still close, watching. Back in town, I checked into a small roadside motel. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat on the edge of the bed, replaying everything in my mind, the cabin, the tracks, the missing car. Then my phone buzzed. I grabbed it so fast my heart nearly stopped. A new message from Alyssa's number. My breath caught as I opened it. "Mom, please stop. You'll make him worse." My whole body went cold. The words didn't sound like her. The phrasing felt stiff, unnatural. I'd read enough control victims' texts in my nursing days to recognize when someone was being forced. The lack of punctuation. The detached tone. It wasn't Alyssa writing freely. It was Eric. I immediately called the number, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I tried texting back. "Where are you? I can help. Please tell me something only you'd know." No reply. Moments later, another text came through. "Don't come after us." Us. The same word from the voice message. My stomach twisted. He was using her phone to send messages, manipulating the narrative even from afar. I called Deputy Reynolds to report it, but he urged me again to let the authorities handle it. I could tell by his tone that he thought I was chasing ghosts. "If they're on the move," he said, "we'll find them eventually." Eventually wasn't good enough. I'd already lost too much time. That night, as I tried to calm my racing mind, I heard a faint sound outside my motel room, a car alarm. My heart jumped. I rushed to the window, and sure enough, my rental car's lights were flashing. The alarm blared in the quiet parking lot. I threw on my jacket and ran outside. When I reached the car, the alarm suddenly stopped. I looked around, but no one was there. The air was thick and still. Then I saw it tucked beneath the windshield wiper, a folded piece of paper. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Scrawled in black ink were 2 words. "You're next." I froze, my mind spinning. I looked around, scanning the parking lot, the shadows between the cars, the dark edges of the forest beyond. Nothing. But the message was clear. Eric knew where I was. He was watching. Fear clawed up my throat, but beneath it, rage began to burn. He wanted to scare me, to make me back off. But he underestimated one thing: I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a woman with nothing left to lose. I rushed back to my room, locked the door, and called 911. Within minutes, another deputy arrived to take my statement. He looked skeptical, just like the last one, until I showed him the note. His expression hardened. "We'll send a patrol, a car to check the area," he said. "Don't leave your room tonight." After he left, I sat by the window, staring out at the empty parking lot. Every flicker of a headlight made my pulse jump. I barely slept, clutching Alyssa's hairpin in my hand like a talisman. By morning, I decided to change tactics. If Eric was tracking me, I'd stop being predictable. I checked out of the motel, paid in cash, and drove east instead of north. Then, once I was out of town, I circled back toward the mountain roads again. He wasn't the only one who could play mind games. At a diner on the edge of town, I pulled out my phone to search online for any Leeds bank activity, credit card charges, anything under his fake name Hayes. To my shock, I found a transaction. A motel payment 2 towns over, time-stamped just hours earlier. The name matched his alias. My heart raced. He was still close. I printed the receipt and sent it to the sheriff's department, demanding they act immediately. The dispatcher promised to send a team. I drove toward the new location anyway, unable to sit back and wait. The roads blurred beneath me as I whispered prayers into the steering wheel. Please, Alyssa, hold on. Every turn brought me closer to something, I could feel it. My mother's instinct wasn't guessing anymore, it was guiding me. When I arrived, there was no car outside. Just another cheap motel. Eerily quiet. I walked to the front desk, showed the clerk Alyssa's photo, and asked if she'd seen her. The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. They checked in late last night, but they left early this morning. I felt my chest tighten. I was always one step behind. The clerk added. The woman looked upset. She asked about buses, said she needed to get to the city. But he came back before I could answer her. So Alyssa was trying to escape, she was fighting back. I left the motel and sat in my car, staring at the horizon. Eric was slipping, he was losing control, and desperate men make mistakes. Eric had turned the hunt around now, I was the target. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I received another voice message from Alyssa herself. It came early in the morning, right as the sky began to lighten. My phone buzzed on the motel nightstand, and I grabbed it instantly, my heart pounding as I saw her name flash across the screen. For a second, I couldn't bring myself to hit play. I was terrified it would be another message that wasn't really her, something Eric forced her to send. But the moment I pressed the button, I knew this one was different. Her voice was trembling, but this time it was hers, real, terrified, and desperate to reach me. Mom, she whispered, if you're hearing this, I'm safe for now. He's slipping. I can't talk long, but I left something for you. There was a pause, the sound of wind in the background, and then she said, find the place with the red pumps and the broken O sign. You'll understand. Then the message cut off. I sat frozen for a few seconds before my brain started spinning. Red pumps? Broken O? What could that mean? I replayed the message 5 times, writing down every sound. The faint hum of traffic, a clanging noise, and what sounded like a bird chirping. My instincts told me she'd chosen her words carefully. Alyssa was smart, she'd always been the kind of person who hid clues in plain sight. Red pumps, I murmured, staring at the map on my phone. Then it hit me. Gas stations. She was referring to gas pumps. And the broken O sign. Maybe an old, run-down station with a missing letter. I opened my laptop and searched for abandoned or old gas stations between where I was and Flagstaff. It didn't take long before one stood out, a derelict station just off Route 66. Its sign once reading Motors but now missing the O, leaving it as M, Tours. Locals had nicknamed it the Broken O. My pulse raced. That had to be it. I packed my bag in record time, double-checked my phone battery, and drove. The rising sun painted the horizon in shades of pink and gold, but I barely noticed. My thoughts were on Alyssa alone, scared, but still fighting. When I reached the station, the building looked like something out of a forgotten movie, faded paint, cracked windows, and 2 old red gas pumps standing like sentinels at the front. The air smelled of rust and dust. My car crunched over gravel as I pulled up and killed the engine. I stepped out cautiously, scanning the area. My heart thudded as I walked toward the pumps, the metal cool under my fingertips. Alyssa? I called softly. Only silence answered me. I checked behind the pumps, inside the small office, even around the back of the building. Nothing until I saw it. A small, worn backpack, half hidden behind an overturned trash bin. My breath caught. I rushed forward and knelt beside it. It was hers, I recognized it instantly. The initials embroidered on the front, A, M, confirmed it. My hands trembled as I unzipped it. Inside were her driver's license, a small envelope of cash, and a burner phone. The phone was off, so I turned it on. A single message flashed on the screen. He's running out of time. Tears blurred my vision. She was trying to tell me something. Maybe Eric's plan was unraveling, maybe he was losing control. But more importantly, she was leaving me a trail. A message, a backpack, a clue. My daughter was fighting to survive, and I wasn't going to let her down. I took photos of everything for evidence, and called the FBI's missing persons line directly this time. I didn't bother with the local sheriff anymore. I told them everything: the alias, the vehicles, the trail of motels, the recorded message. I sent them copies of the photos and even the voice clip Alyssa had just sent. This time, the agent on the other end didn't dismiss me. His voice was firm, professional, and serious. "Ma'am, please stay where you are. We're sending a field team to your location. Don't try to follow him yourself." For once, someone believed me. Relief and adrenaline surged through me at the same time. I agreed to wait, but waiting wasn't my strength. I walked around the area again, hoping for one more clue. The wind carried faint sounds from the nearby highway, and a piece of paper fluttered by my feet. I picked it up. It was a receipt from a nearby convenience store, time-stamped just 2 hours earlier. Eric's alias was printed on it: Eric Hayes. He was still close. I called the agent back immediately, giving them the store's address. Within minutes, they had dispatched agents to that area. They asked me to stay put, but I couldn't. Every minute wasted could mean Alyssa slipping further away. I got back in my car and drove slowly down the highway, following the direction listed on the receipt. About 10 miles later, I spotted flashing lights ahead: 2 unmarked SUVs parked near a dirt road. My chest tightened as I pulled over. A man in an FBI jacket approached my car. "Mrs. Miller?" he asked. "Yes," I breathed. "We've been tracking the suspect's movements for a while. You did the right thing calling us. He's using multiple aliases. But your daughter's message helped us narrow his trail." I could barely speak. "Do you know where she is?" He nodded slightly. "We're closing in on him, but we need you to stay back for your safety." Every instinct in me wanted to protest, to demand they take me with them. But I also knew they were trained for this. I nodded, clutching the backpack against my chest as if it were her. Hours passed as I waited at a safe distance, the sun setting behind the trees. Then, just as night fell, the radio in the nearby agent's car crackled to life. "Suspect located. Engaging. Female found. Repeat, female found." My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what engaging meant, but I didn't care. The only part that mattered was female found. I pressed my hands over my mouth, tears streaming down my face. After days of fear, sleepless nights, and unanswered prayers, there was finally hope. By nightfall, a federal team was tracking Eric's movements, and his plan began to unravel. The agents took my evidence seriously: the photos, the voice messages, the notes. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like someone was finally listening. I wasn't a frantic mother chasing ghosts anymore. I was a key witness helping the FBI locate a fugitive and rescue my daughter. The field agents led me to a mobile command van parked at the edge of a dirt road. Inside, screens flickered with maps and surveillance feeds. I watched, heart pounding, as they traced the route Eric had taken: every motel, every gas station, every stop he made under his fake name, Eric Hayes. Agent Donovan, a tall man with a steady voice and kind eyes, explained the situation. "We've been tracking this alias for months. He's wanted for wire fraud and identity theft across multiple states. We didn't realize he'd taken someone with him until your call." The realization hit me hard. Eric wasn't just abusive. He was a criminal running from the law. Alyssa had been caught in the middle of something much bigger than I'd ever imagined. Donovan pointed to the map. "He's heading south, toward the Mexican border. There's an unmonitored checkpoint he might try to cross at night. If he gets through, we'll lose him. Then we can't let that happen." He nodded. "We won't." They formed an intercept team, a mix of local deputies and federal agents coordinating through radios and unmarked vehicles. I wasn't allowed to go, of course, but they let me stay in the van. I sat beside a young tech analyst who monitored GPS pings from Eric's last known burner phone. My palms were sweating so much I had to wipe them on my jeans every few minutes. Hours passed like lifetimes. The sun dipped below the mountains, and the desert turned a haunting shade of blue. The radio crackled occasionally, brief updates, coded chatter. Then, around 9 p.m., a voice came through. "We've got movement on the target vehicle, southbound mile marker 217. Everyone snapped to attention. The atmosphere shifted from tense waiting to sharp action. "Copy that," Donovan said. Units 2 and 3, box him in. Wait for confirmation before approaching. I pressed my hands together and whispered a silent prayer. My daughter was somewhere in that car, terrified, believing no one was coming for her. But we were. Minutes crawled by before the radio flared again. Visual confirmation. 2 occupants, male driver, female passenger, attempting to flee. I gasped, leaning forward. That's her, I whispered. That has to be her. Stay calm, Donovan said gently, keeping his eyes on the monitors. We've got them. A live drone feed appeared on one of the screens. The image was grainy but clear enough. I saw a dark SUV speeding down a narrow road, headlights bouncing. Behind it, 2 unmarked vehicles followed closely. Then, a set of flashing red and blue lights cut across the feed as a roadblock appeared ahead. Stop him, Donovan ordered into his radio. Tires screeched. The SUV swerved, fishtailing in the dirt, then came to a halt at an awkward angle. Agents surrounded the vehicle, weapons drawn. I couldn't breathe. The radio crackled again. Suspect detained. Female recovered. Repeat, female recovered. The room erupted in movement, people coordinating the aftermath, but I was frozen, staring at the words scribbled across the whiteboard as they updated the operation log. Subject in custody. Victim safe. Donovan turned to me, his expression softening. We got her, Mrs. Miller. My hands flew to my face. I couldn't stop the sobs that tore through me, relief, exhaustion, disbelief all at once. After days of terror and uncertainty, she was safe. My baby was safe. They took me to a nearby station where Alyssa was being processed and questioned. When I saw her sitting in the back of a patrol SUV, wrapped in a blanket, I nearly collapsed. Her eyes met mine, and for a second, she looked like a little girl again, the same eyes that used to look up at me after a bad dream, seeking comfort. Mom, she whispered as I ran toward her. I pulled her into my arms, holding her so tightly I thought I might never let go. She was trembling, her skin cold against my cheek. I'm here, I whispered. It's over. She started to cry, the kind of sob that comes from deep inside, the kind you can't control. Between gasps, she said, he almost got away. He said no one would find us. I brushed her hair back gently. He was wrong, sweetheart. I found you. We found you. Donovan gave us a few moments before gently explaining that they'd be taking Eric to a federal holding facility. He was being charged not just with fraud, but with kidnapping and coercion. Alyssa's testimony and the evidence she'd secretly left behind would seal his fate. But even as I held her, I could see the trauma etched in her face. She wasn't free yet, not completely. Freedom from fear doesn't come the moment the danger ends. It comes slowly, piece by piece, with time. They brought us both to a safe house overnight, guarded by 2 agents. I stayed awake most of the night, watching Alyssa sleep beside me. She flinched in her dreams, murmuring words I couldn't quite make out. I wanted to believe it was over, that we'd both finally escaped his shadow. But deep down, I knew Eric wasn't the type to let go quietly. There was still something unsettled in his eyes when they took him away, something that promised he wasn't done yet. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, Alyssa stirred, her hand finding mine. Mom, she whispered, her voice hoarse. He said he'd never really lose. I squeezed her hand, forcing confidence into my tone. He already has. But in the pit of my stomach, a chill lingered, a warning that this nightmare wasn't completely over. But Eric wasn't done fighting yet. During interrogation, Eric's perfect image finally crumbled. I didn't see it happen in person, but I didn't need to. The agents told me everything afterward, and the transcripts filled in the rest. He walked into that interrogation room in his usual crisp shirt, his hair neatly combed, the same smug expression he always wore when he thought he had control. But by the time they were done with him, that expression was gone. They said he started with charm, always his first weapon. He laughed, joked, called the situation a big misunderstanding, claimed Alyssa and he had just been on vacation and that her family was overly emotional. He even tried to smile at the female agent questioning him, like he could charm her the way he'd fooled everyone else. But the agents had the evidence. My photos, Alyssa's messages, the motel records, and most importantly, the recording Alyssa had secretly saved on that burner phone. The moment they played it for him, the performance cracked. In the recording, his voice was unmistakable, sharp, cruel, and full of rage. "If you ever call her again, I swear, Alyssa, I'll make sure she regrets it. You're not going back to that life. You're mine now." Listening to it later made me physically sick. To hear the venom in his tone, the absolute control in his words, it confirmed every fear I'd ever had. He wasn't just manipulative, he was dangerous. When confronted with the recording, he stammered, tried to twist it around, claiming it was role play or taken out of context. But the agents had already pieced everything together. The fake names, the offshore accounts, the stolen funds. He'd been running a network of scams long before Alyssa came into his life. She wasn't just his wife, she was his cover. As Agent Donovan explained it to me later, Eric had used Alyssa's clean record and identity to open accounts, transfer money, and move assets under fake corporations. She'd unknowingly signed off on some of them, thinking they were joint investments. That's why he isolated her, why he made her quit her job and cut contact with friends. He needed control over her entire world. Alyssa sat quietly in the next room as the agents questioned her, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes hollow but steady. They said she didn't cry once during the interview. She told them how Eric had slowly taken everything from her, her bank cards, her phone, her freedom. How he'd forced her to send that first voice message to me, saying, "You're not coming with us." He'd stood right beside her, watching, threatening. When she told me that later, my knees almost gave out. I'd played that message so many times, blaming myself, wondering what I'd done wrong when all along she'd been trying to protect me. Eric made her record it because he didn't want me following. He knew I would. For days, I sat beside her during debriefings, holding her hand as she spoke about things no daughter should have to say in front of her mother. The threats, the manipulation, the constant gaslighting, it was a cycle of control that chipped away at her until she barely recognized herself. But the agents kept reminding her she'd done the bravest thing imaginable, she'd survived. I'll never forget the first time she truly broke down. We were alone in the safe house kitchen. Late at night. She was stirring her tea when she whispered, "I thought if I did everything right, he'd stop being angry. I thought it was my fault." I went to her and held her close, whispering, "It was never your fault, Alyssa. Never." That night, she finally slept without nightmares for a few hours, at least. A few days later, I was asked to review a portion of Eric's confession. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I needed to hear him admit it to know for sure. The transcript was worse than I'd expected. He confessed to draining Alyssa's savings, forging her signature, and planning to flee the country under her name. He said she'd gotten in the way. That's what he called it, getting in the way. My hands shook as I read those words. I wanted to hate him, but hate didn't feel strong enough. What I felt was grief. Grief for the years Alyssa lost, for the girl who once believed in love stories and happy endings. When the interrogation ended, the agents told me Eric had finally stopped pretending. They said he sat back in his chair, smiled that same cold smile and said, "She'll never forget me." Those words haunted me. Even from behind bars, he wanted control. He wanted to live rent-free in her mind. Alyssa overheard the agents talking about it and went quiet for a long time. Later, she said softly, "He's right about one thing. I won't forget him. But not for the reason he thinks." There was strength in her voice that hadn't been there before. It reminded me of the little girl who used to fall off her bike, scrape her knee, and laugh through the pain. That spark, her spark, was still there. In the weeks that followed, I watched as she began to piece herself back together. Therapy sessions, daily check-ins with the FBI, long talks on the porch about what came next. Each day, her laughter returned a little more. Eric's arraignment was scheduled for the following month. When I attended the preliminary hearing, I saw him one last time. His hair was unkempt, his suit wrinkled, his confidence gone. He looked smaller somehow, like the power had drained out of him the moment Alyssa found her voice again. He glanced at us as they led him away, expecting fear. But all he saw was silence. Alyssa stood, tall beside me, her expression calm, her shoulders squared. He didn't own her anymore, but even from custody, he still had one more surprise for us. Just when I thought it was over, Eric's lawyer delivered a chilling message. It had been a few weeks since the arraignment, and life was finally starting to settle into something that resembled normalcy. Alyssa and I were living together again in my home, trying to rebuild what we'd lost. She'd started therapy, taken small steps toward independence, and even began volunteering part-time at a local shelter for women escaping abusive relationships. Watching her help others made me proud beyond words. I thought, maybe for the first time in months, that the nightmare was finally behind us. Then the letter arrived. It was addressed to me directly from the office of Eric's defense attorney. At first, I thought it might be some procedural notice or update regarding the case. But the moment I read the first line, my stomach turned. Per the request of my client, Eric Hayes, legal name, Eric Mallard, we are obligated to inform you of financial matters concerning both yourself and your daughter, Alyssa Miller. Financial matters. The phrase alone made my chest tighten. I skimmed the rest, my eyes catching on key words that made the blood drain from my face. Joint account, overseas transfer, pending investigation. I called Alyssa into the room immediately. Together, we read it word for word. The lawyer claimed that Eric had established a joint bank account months before his arrest, listing both Alyssa and me as beneficiaries. It had been used to move shared marital funds, but according to investigators, those funds were linked to the same fraudulent transactions Eric was being charged with. In short, if Alyssa touched that account, she could be implicated in his crimes. Alyssa went pale. "Mom, he used my name again, didn't he?" I nodded slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. "He used both of them. Ours." It was brilliant in the most horrifying way. Even from a jail cell, he had found a way to reach us, to trap us in his chaos once more. I called Agent Donovan immediately, explaining what had just happened. He met us that same afternoon at the field office. After reading the letter, his expression darkened. "He knew the money trail would lead here," Donovan said. "He set this up months ago, probably as leverage in case things went south. If you or Alyssa accessed that account, even by accident, it could have looked like you were involved." I sank into the chair, the weight of it hitting me all at once. "So what happens now?" He assured us that the FBI's Financial Crimes Division would take over. They'd freeze the account immediately, investigate its origins, and clear our names from any association. But even with that reassurance, I couldn't shake the chill that ran down my spine. Eric's reach extended beyond bars. He didn't need freedom to inflict pain, just foresight. That night, Alyssa sat quietly in the living room, staring at the flickering television but not really watching it. "I should have seen it coming," she said finally. "He was always one step ahead. He used to tell me, 'You'll never win,' because I plan for everything." I went to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't lose. You survived. That's what he never planned for." She leaned into me, tears silently spilling down her cheeks. "Why does it still feel like he's here, Mom? Like he's still pulling strings?" I didn't have an answer. Maybe trauma leaves echoes that take time to fade. Maybe monsters like Eric cast long shadows. 2 days later, Donovan called with an update. The financial team had tracked every wire transfer connected to the joint account. It led to a network of shell companies all tied to Eric. And buried within the records, they found something else, a second offshore account solely under his name, containing nearly $500,000. He'd hidden it, hoping Alyssa's account would take the fall if it was ever discovered. The agents moved quickly, freezing every dollar. Within a week, the Department of Justice had enough to charge him with new counts of money laundering and obstruction. Alyssa's name was cleared completely. When I told her, she exhaled a shaky laugh, relief flooding her face for the first time in days. "He tried to drag us down with him," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "But he failed." "Yes," I whispered, smiling through tears. "He failed." It was poetic in its own way. The man who prided himself on control had lost it entirely. The more he tried to manipulate the system, the tighter the walls closed around him. His last attempt at revenge had only added years to his sentence. The day of his final sentencing, Alyssa asked me to go with her to the courthouse. I hesitated at first, unsure if it was wise for her to face him again. But she looked at me with a calm determination I hadn't seen in a long time. "I need to see it end," she said. We sat together in the front row as the judge read the charges: fraud, kidnapping, coercion, and now, financial crimes. Eric stood at the defense table, thinner than before, his arrogance drained. For once, he didn't look like the man who thought he could outsmart everyone. He looked small. When the sentence was handed down, 27 years without parole, Alyssa reached for my hand and squeezed it. As they led him away, Eric glanced back at us, but Alyssa didn't flinch. She met his stare, unblinking, and said softly under her breath, "We're free." I felt something shift inside me at that moment. It wasn't triumph or vengeance, it was peace. The kind that comes after a long storm when the air finally clears. We walked out of the courthouse, hand in hand, the afternoon sun warm on our faces. Alyssa took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing as she said, "It's over now." The day he was sentenced, Alyssa finally looked at me and said, "We're free." Freedom felt heavier than I expected. It came with scars we couldn't see. In the weeks after Eric's sentencing, the world seemed quieter, but the silence didn't bring comfort. It was the kind of quiet that followed a long, violent storm where everything looks calm, but the debris still lies scattered everywhere. Alyssa and I were free, yes, but the pieces of our lives were still broken, and neither of us knew quite how to start putting them back together. She moved back in with me for a while, into the same room she'd slept in as a teenager. I tried to make it feel safe again: fresh sheets, lavender candles, her favorite blanket folded at the end of the bed. The first night, she stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside, like she was crossing into a memory she wasn't sure she was ready to face. That night, I found her sitting by the window, staring out at the stars. "I forgot what peace sounds like," she said quietly. We built our new routine slowly. Mornings were for tea and quiet conversations. Afternoons, she'd join me in the garden, helping me tend to the roses she used to complain about trimming as a teenager. Now, she said the work felt grounding. Sometimes, she'd hum softly while she worked, and I'd feel that lump in my throat, the one that always came when I realized how close I came to losing her. But healing isn't linear. There were nights she'd wake up screaming, clutching her chest, eyes wide with panic. I'd run to her room, holding her until her breathing steadied. Sometimes she'd cry. Sometimes she'd just sit there in silence. "He's not here," I'd whisper, over and over. "He can't hurt you anymore." One morning, I woke to the sound of clattering dishes. I rushed to the kitchen, half expecting a disaster, but stopped short when I saw her. Alyssa was making breakfast pancakes, coffee, even cutting up fruit the way I used to for her when she was little. When she noticed me, she smiled shyly. "I figured it's my turn to take care of you." We laughed, and for the first time in a long time, it sounded real. She started therapy with a counselor recommended by the Victim Support Unit. The sessions were hard on her, but necessary. Some days she came home quiet and tired. Others she came home lighter, like she'd let go of something that had weighed her down for years. She told me once, "He made me believe love meant control." I'm trying to unlearn that. I was proud of her. Proud beyond words, but there were moments when the guilt still crept in. I'd look at her and think about all the times I'd doubted my instincts, all the times I told myself I was overreacting. If I'd pushed harder, maybe things would have been different. One evening, I finally told her that. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, you saved me. Don't ever question that again." Her words hit me harder than she probably realized. Because for so long, I'd carried that guilt like a shadow. Hearing her say that lifted something off me. Weeks turned into months. And little by little, life began to bloom again. We went on walks together, talked about books and plans, and even laughed at bad TV shows like we used to. Alyssa began volunteering regularly, helping other women escape abusive partners. She told me that sharing her story helped her feel in control again. One afternoon, she came home with a small tattoo on her wrist, an open bird cage with a single bird flying free. "It's my reminder," she said, smiling faintly, "that I got out. That I can still fly." I couldn't stop the tears from falling, but they were good tears, the kind that come from pride. Not pain. Still, the past had a way of sneaking back in. Sometimes we'd get official letters about ongoing legal proceedings, appeals, paperwork, case, reviews. Each one made my stomach drop, even though they were procedural. The law was catching up with Eric, but emotionally, we were still outrunning him. One evening, while sorting through some of Alyssa's things, I found her old phone, the one she'd used before Eric took control of her life. The screen was cracked, the battery long dead. When I showed it to her, she looked at it for a long time before saying, "I'm not ready to go through it yet. But one day, I will." That night, as we sat on the porch drinking tea, she looked up at the sky and said, "Do you think we'll ever stop looking over our shoulders?" I took a deep breath. "Maybe not completely, but every day the shadow gets a little smaller." She nodded, thoughtful. "I think I'm starting to believe that." Alyssa began smiling more, laughing louder, and dreaming again. She talked about maybe going back to school, maybe even starting that boutique she used to dream about. Each time she spoke about the future, I saw a piece of her old self return. But life has a strange way of giving closure when you least expect it. One evening, as she was backing up files from her old devices for her therapist, she called out from her room, "Mom, I found something." Her tone wasn't afraid, it was curious, almost calm. I went to her door, and she held up her phone, a faint recording icon blinking on the screen. "It's an old file. I think I recorded him once without realizing it." I felt my pulse quicken. "What's on it?" She hesitated, eyes glinting with something between fear and relief. "I think it's proof of everything." But something unexpected still waited for us, hidden in her phone history. Weeks after Eric's sentencing, Alyssa's therapist asked her to revisit her old phone messages. At first, she resisted. She said those digital ghosts, the texts, the calls, the recordings felt like scars she wasn't ready to reopen. But her therapist gently explained that facing them could help her reclaim control, that confronting her own story was a form of healing. So, one quiet afternoon, we sat together at the kitchen table, her old phone plugged into my laptop, the charger barely holding it to life. The screen flickered, showing fragments of her past photos, notes, voice memos. I sat beside her silently, letting her decide what to open and what to leave buried. After a while, she clicked on a file labeled Audio 423. "I don't remember naming that one," she murmured. She hit play, and a burst of static filled the room before settling into clarity. Then we heard his voice, Eric's voice. He was angry, furious, actually. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" He sneered. "You think your mom will save you? She'll ruin everything. She always does." Alyssa froze, her hands trembling around the phone. I reached over and squeezed her shoulder. "You don't have to listen," I whispered. But she shook her head. "No. I want to." The recording continued. We heard Alyssa's voice, soft, scared, pleading, "Eric, please, I just want to call her, she's worried." Then his reply, cold and chilling, "You'll do what I say. You'll tell her you're not coming with us. Or I swear you'll regret it." I gasped softly, covering my mouth. That was the moment. The message that started everything. Alyssa's eyes filled with tears, but not from fear. This time, they were tears of release. She finally had proof, irrefutable proof, that he'd forced her to send that message. The recording went on for several more minutes. He talked about the plan, about money transfers and fake identities. Even mentioned the exact name of one of the shell companies the FBI had uncovered later. It was all there, confession, coercion, evidence. When it ended, the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the fridge. Alyssa set the phone down slowly and whispered, "I must have hit record by accident that night. I didn't even know it was there." I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of sorrow and awe. "You saved yourself without even realizing it," I said softly. We immediately called Agent Donovan, and within an hour, an FBI technician arrived to retrieve the device. They treated it like the treasure it was, a final nail in Eric's coffin. The recording reopened his case, adding several new charges: witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and criminal coercion. When Donovan called a few days later to confirm that the new evidence had been filed, I could hear genuine admiration in his voice. "Your daughter's bravery just made the case ironclad," he said. "He'll never walk free." That night, Alyssa and I sat on the porch again, wrapped in blankets, staring up at the stars. The air felt lighter, different somehow. For the first time in so long, the weight that had pressed against my chest seemed to lift. Alyssa sipped her tea and said quietly, "It's strange, that recording, it's like hearing a ghost. But it doesn't scare me anymore. It reminds me that I survived." I smiled at her, brushing a stray hair from her face. "You didn't just survive, Alyssa. You won." She nodded, her gaze steady. "You know what's even better? I can finally listen to his voice without feeling small. Now it just sounds pathetic." We laughed, a sound that felt like music after months of fear. The wind rustled through the trees, and for once, it didn't sound ominous, it sounded alive. In the weeks that followed, Alyssa and I made big changes. We sold my old house, the one filled with too many memories, and moved to a small town a few hours away. A quiet place with mountains in the distance and a farmer's market every Saturday. A place where the sun poured through the kitchen windows each morning, and laughter didn't echo off the walls like a stranger. Alyssa started art therapy classes at a community center. She painted her first piece, a sunrise breaking through storm clouds, and gave it to me on my birthday. She'd titled it Breaking Point. We adopted a rescue dog, a golden retriever named Daisy, who followed Alyssa everywhere she went. Watching them together reminded me that healing isn't just about forgetting the past, it's about learning to trust the world again. Some mornings, I wake up to the sound of Alyssa humming in the kitchen. It's such a simple sound, but it's proof that peace can grow even after chaos. Sometimes I still think about that voice message, the one that started it all. The one that made me think I was losing my daughter. But now, when I play it in my mind, I hear something different. Not fear, not pain, but courage. Hidden beneath those trembling words was a daughter trying to protect her mother, even while trapped in danger herself. If I could go back to that night, I'd tell myself not to panic, not to despair. I'd whisper, "Hold on, Caroline. She's stronger than you think." Alyssa once told me she doesn't want to be defined by what Eric did to her. She said, "I want people to remember what I did after." And that's exactly what I do. When I look at her now, I don't see the frightened young woman I found in that cabin. I see someone reborn, brave, resilient, whole. We still have bad days, flashbacks, moments of anxiety, sudden tears, but they pass. And what remains is love unbroken, unshakable, and stronger than anything Eric could have ever destroyed. Sometimes, as the sun sets over our little town, I close my eyes and think about everything we've endured. The fear, the fight, the long road home. And then I hear Alyssa's laughter from the other room, bright and free. Because in the end, Eric's plan didn't destroy us, it revealed just how strong we were.